Welcome back to the channel. This is GeoS. We're here with another GEO-EPOCHS episode. Today we're going to cover how to read a contour map. This builds on to the episode we did last week, how to read a geologic map. If you understand how to read both, that's very helpful. So let's jump right into this. All right, so what we'll be looking at today is the Guadalupe Mountains. It's probably the greatest elevation change you'll see in the state of Texas. Texas is a huge state, but the mountainous areas are concentrated along the western portion of Texas and the southern portion of Texas. So we're looking at the Guadalupe Mountains. As you can see just from here on this screen, you see the Crow Flats, you see the Broke-Off Mountains, the Crow Flats, the Guadalupe Mountains, the Salt Basin, which is actually a pretty cool sight to see. You have, cities. White City leads to Carlsbad Caverns. If you've never been there before, it's definitely something cool to check out. There's a bunch of interesting geologic features in our area here. The Guadalupe Mountains has Guadalupe Peak. It also has El Capitan, which is a beautiful, peak. You have Carlsbad off in the distance. So you'll see that roads are demarcated on a topographic map. You'll see that rivers are demarcated. This isn't necessarily a lake. It's kind of dry, but it's a playa. It's an old salt basin that evaporated during the late Paleozoic Permian. So it still has salts, and that's pretty cool. Anyways, so you'll see that this point, Guadalupe Peak, has an elevation of 8,755 feet. So let's jump into that. And that's what's called a benchmark. When they have a point identified like that, that's called a benchmark. They use GPS equipment to determine an elevation for a certain point. So you'll have what's called a benchmark. You have 3 right here, and those are 3 of the tallest peaks in Texas right there. And then El Capitan is right here. As you can see, it also has a benchmark. So one thing you'll notice when you look at a topographic map is there's bolded lines and then there's unbolded lines. The bolded lines are what is called a index contour. The unbolded lines is just basically an increase in your contour interval. So the difference between the 2 bolded lines, you subtract that and then divide by the number of lines between your index contours. In this case, and this map gives me issues, you have 8720. So your contour, your index contours, one has 8640, the other has 8720. And you have 2 lines between the index contours. So that would be a contour interval of 40 feet because the difference between the index contours is 80 feet. The contour interval in this case is 40 feet. So every line that you see is an increase in elevation of 40 feet. And one thing you'll notice here, it's very steep in front of Guadalupe Peak. Super steep, super steep. These lines are very close together, as you can see, and that obviously represents a very, 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 very steep slope. Whereas you pull out into the salt basin and the lines are further apart, you pull even further right here, that means it's a gentle slope. The elevation change isn't as great here as it is going up to Guadalupe Peak right here. And you can see that this carbonate ridge is very, very steep. My favorite feature in this entire area is El Capitan. And let's look at that. This is El Capitan, and it leads into Guadalupe Peak over here. But it's a beautiful sight to see. It reminds me of Lord of the Rings, one of the towers, the 2 towers. It reminds me of like you're looking at one of the towers from Lord of the Rings. Pretty cool. And then you have these talus slopes. And if you look at that, it's pretty steep. It's not as steep as at the front of El Capitan, but it's still pretty steep. And you don't really see a gentle slope up until you get to this point down here, where you start getting into ephemeral streams. See, there's ephemeral streams right here, and it starts flattening out a little bit, but it's very terraneous in this area. And another good place to see some gentle topographic lines would be out in this flatter area, closer to Odessa and and Carlsbad. It gets very flat. As you can see, there's a lot of distance between these lines where they're drilling for oil. So obviously that's much more gradual sloping. And yeah, I think I've pretty much, you can see it's the New Mexico boundary demarcated right here. You have New Mexico on this side and Texas on this side. So, you know, you'll see features like that on topographic maps. So I hope y'all enjoyed this. Let me know what you want to see in the next episode. Otherwise, I still have a list of stuff to go through. Later, Essentials.